The day I decided to call off my wedding and kick my future brother-in-law's family out onto the street, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood in the middle of my living room, staring at a massive sticky puddle of spilled red wine soaking into my custom cream-colored rug, and realized something that I think takes some of us a lifetime to learn. When you open your door to people who feel entitled to your peace, your kindness isn't seen as a gift. It's seen as a weakness. It becomes an invitation for them to take over. If you've ever built a sanctuary for yourself, you know exactly what I mean. I'm 28 years old and I bought my house entirely on my own. It isn't a sprawling mansion, just a beautiful, historic 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet, leafy suburb in Ohio. But to me, it was my entire world. I work as an interior designer, and I poured every ounce of my savings, my late nights, and my weekends into that house. I stripped the century-old hardwood floors by hand. I spent months tracking down the perfect antique brass fixtures. I had a small studio room bathed in morning light where I kept my grandmother's solid oak drafting table. That house was the physical proof that my hard work meant something. It was my safe haven. Then came Liam. Liam was 30, charming, kind, and exactly the kind of man I thought I wanted to build a life with. We had been engaged for 6 months, and our wedding was practically around the corner. Liam was wonderful in almost every way, but he had one massive, glaring blind spot: his family. To Liam, family was a magic word that excused any bad behavior, any boundary crossed, and any disrespect. I should have seen the red flags earlier, but love has a funny way of making you put on blinders. The nightmare actually started on a rainy Tuesday evening with a phone call. We were sitting on my couch eating takeout when Liam's phone buzzed. It was his older brother, Marcus. I could hear Marcus's voice through the receiver, frantic and loud. Liam's face went pale. He hung up, looked at me with this devastated puppy dog expression, and dropped the bomb. "Marcus and Jessica lost their house," he said, his voice shaking. "The landlord sold the property out from under them. They have nowhere to go. They need to stay with us." Let me give you a little context about Marcus and his wife, Jessica. Marcus is 35, carries himself like he's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but jumps from one mysterious business venture to another. Jessica, who is 33, is the kind of woman who will look you up and down, compliment your shoes, and somehow make it sound like an insult. She was always dripping in designer labels, constantly posting on social media about her luxury vacations, and always playing the victim if she didn't get her way. "Liam," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm so sorry they're in a tough spot. But my house, it's not really set up for another couple to just move in." "It's just for 2 months, Chloe," Liam pleaded, taking my hands. "Just 60 days. They're family. My mom is terrified they're going to end up in a motel. Please. I know it's your house, but as my future wife, I'm begging you to help my family." There it was, the guilt trip wrapped in the promise of our future together. I wanted to be a good partner. I wanted his mother, Martha, to see me as the supportive daughter-in-law. Against every screaming instinct in my gut, I agreed. 2 months, 60 days. That was the firm boundary. That weekend, they arrived. I had expected them to bring a few suitcases, maybe some essentials while they put the rest of their lives in a storage unit. Instead, a massive moving truck backed into my driveway, crushing my newly planted hydrangeas in the process. Marcus hopped out, not even apologizing for the tire tracks in the flower bed, while Jessica emerged from the passenger seat holding a tiny, shivering designer dog I had expressly said they couldn't bring. "Oh, Chloe, thank you so much," Jessica sighed, breezing past me through the front door without wiping her boots. She stopped in the center of my meticulously curated living room, looked around, and gave a tight, condescending smile. "It's so quaint, very cozy. We'll make it work for a few weeks, I suppose." I swallowed the lump of irritation in my throat. I had cleared out the best guest room for them, bought fresh linens, and made space in the pantry. I thought that if I was overwhelmingly gracious, they would be overwhelmingly grateful. I was so incredibly naive. The erosion of my boundaries didn't happen with a massive explosion. It happened exactly the way water destroys a foundation, slowly, quietly, and persistently, until the structure is completely compromised. It started in the kitchen. I am very particular about my kitchen. I love to cook, and I had organized my spices, my pans, and my coffee station in a way that made my chaotic mornings peaceful. On their third day there, I came downstairs at 6 a.m. to make my coffee before work. I reached for my favorite mug, a heavy, handcrafted ceramic piece I bought on a trip to Sedona. It wasn't on its hook. I opened the cabinets and froze. Everything had been rearranged. My ceramic mugs were shoved to the very back of the top shelf, completely out of reach. In their place at the front were 6 garish, neon-colored plastic tumblers Jessica had unpacked from her boxes. My artisanal coffee beans were gone, replaced by a massive generic tub of cheap ground coffee. Jessica padded into the kitchen in her silk robe, looking perfectly refreshed. "Morning, sweetie," she chirped. "Jessica," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Did you move my things?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh yes, I hope you don't mind. The way you had it set up just didn't make any sense for our morning routine. Marcus needs his specific coffee, and I just couldn't reach your little mugs. This is so much more functional for everyone, don't you think?" Notice her phrasing, our morning routine, everyone, as if my routine in my own home was suddenly a secondary concern. "I prefer my things where they were," I said, stepping up to a stool to retrieve my mug. "Please don't reorganize my cabinets again." Jessica's eyes widened, filling with sudden dramatic tears. "I was just trying to help," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to make us feel like a family, but I guess I'm just a burden." She turned and fled up the stairs. 10 minutes later, Liam came down, looking exhausted and frustrated. "Chloe, really? You made her cry over a coffee cup? They're going through a hard time. Can't you just let the little things go to keep the peace?" That was the phrase that would become the soundtrack to the next few weeks. Keep the peace. But I quickly realized that keeping the peace simply meant I had to swallow my discomfort so that Marcus and Jessica never had to experience any. By week 3, the little things were multiplying rapidly. I came home from a long day with a difficult client, looking forward to a hot shower and my nighttime skincare routine. I went into my master bathroom, the one room I had explicitly told them was off limits, as they had their own full bathroom attached to the guest suite. The air smelled strongly of Marcus's heavy cologne. My expensive imported night cream, a jar that cost me over $100 and was supposed to last 6 months, was sitting open on the counter, a huge scoop gouged out of it. My plush monogrammed towels were in a wet heap on the floor. I saw red. I marched downstairs and found Jessica draped over my velvet sofa, eating popcorn and dropping kernels onto the cushions. "Jessica, were you in my bathroom?" I demanded, my voice harder than it had ever been. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, my shower pressure is just terrible in the guest room, and my skin was feeling so dry from the stress of the move. You have so much of that lotion, I figured you wouldn't mind sharing with your sister." "It's not lotion, it's a very expensive treatment, and that bathroom is private," I said, my hands shaking. "You cannot just take what isn't yours." Marcus walked into the room just in time to hear the end of it. He puffed out his chest, stepping between me and his wife. "Whoa, relax, Chloe. It's just some face cream. Don't be so stingy. I'll buy you a new bottle at the drugstore tomorrow if it's such a big deal. You're acting like we're strangers off the street." "You are guests in my home," I shot back. "And there are rules." "We're family," Marcus corrected, his voice dropping to a condescending boom. "And in this family, we share. Liam knows that. Maybe you need to learn it before you marry him." When Liam got home that night, I told him exactly what happened. I told him I felt disrespected, violated, and entirely uncomfortable in my own sanctuary. I expected him to finally stand up for me. I expected the man I was going to marry to put his foot down and protect the life we were trying to build. Instead, Liam sat on the edge of our bed, put his head in his hands, and sighed. "I talked to my mom today," he said quietly. "She said Marcus is really depressed about losing his house. She begged me to be patient with them. Chloe, please, it's only been 3 weeks. We only have 5 weeks left. I can't kick my own brother out. Just hide your expensive stuff, okay? I'll buy you a lock for the bathroom cabinet if it makes you feel better." He wanted me to put a padlock on my own bathroom cabinets in my own house, rather than tell his brother to respect me. That night, lying awake in the dark while Liam snored beside me, a cold, hard realization settled into my chest. This wasn't just about coffee mugs or face cream. This was about power. Jessica and Marcus were testing the fences, pushing against the boundaries to see just how much ground they could take, and Liam was holding the gate wide open for them. The 2-month mark was approaching, and despite Liam's promises, I saw absolutely no evidence that they were looking for a new place. There were no apartment brochures on the counter, no hushed conversations about mortgages or leases. In fact, Jessica had started having mail delivered to my address in her name. I decided I was done playing the passive hostess. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked into the dining room where Marcus and Jessica were eating breakfast, and sat down at the head of the table. "All right," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and businesslike. "Your 60 days are up on the 15th of next month. I want to check in on your progress. Have you signed a lease yet? Because I have a cleaning service booked for the 16th to deep clean the guest room." The room went dead silent. Marcus slowly put down his fork. Jessica looked at me, then looked at Marcus, a calculating glint in her eyes. "Well, about that," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "The market is really tough right now, Chloe. Nothing in our price range is available. And frankly, with the wedding coming up, we thought it made more sense for us to just stay here and help you guys out. Pool our resources." "No," I said instantly. The word hung in the air, sharp and clear. "The agreement was 2 months. That is not changing." Jessica reached across the table and patted my hand with an icy touch. "Chloe, sweetie, we don't want to stress you out, but we really don't have anywhere else to go. You wouldn't want to upset Liam's mother right before the wedding, would you? Martha was just telling me yesterday how happy she is that we're all bonding under one roof." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. They were weaponizing Liam's mother against me. "The 15th, I repeated, standing up. "I expect you packed and out by the 15th. I went to work that day feeling a strange mix of adrenaline and dread. I had finally drawn a hard line in the sand. I thought I had taken control of the situation. I thought I had made myself perfectly clear. But I had severely underestimated the lengths to which entitled people will go when you threaten to cut off their supply. I didn't know it yet, but my firm boundary hadn't solved the problem. It had only triggered a war. And the very next week, I would discover just how deep the betrayal actually ran, and exactly whose side the man I loved was truly on. If there is one thing I have learned about people who refuse to respect your boundaries, it is that they are almost always hiding a fundamental truth about themselves. They rely on your politeness to cover up their own chaos. The first crack in Marcus and Jessica's carefully constructed victim narrative appeared entirely by accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 5 weeks into their stay. The deadline I had given them, the 15th of the month, was looming, and the air in my house had become thick with a suffocating, unspoken hostility. Jessica had stopped speaking to me entirely, communicating only through loud, dramatic sighs whenever I entered a room. Marcus spent most of his days on my back patio, smoking expensive cigars and talking loudly on his phone about pending capital and synergy. I had come home during my lunch break to grab a fabric swatch book I needed for a client meeting. The mail had just been delivered, shoved haphazardly through the brass slot on my front door. As I gathered the envelopes from the hardwood floor, a heavy cream-colored envelope slipped from the pile. It was addressed to Jessica, but the flap had caught on the mail slot and torn completely open. I am not the kind of person who snoops. I believe in privacy. But as I went to place the envelope on the entryway console, the thick, folded parchment inside slid halfway out, and printed in bold, undeniable black ink right at the top was a logo I recognized instantly, a premium, high-limit credit card company. Beneath the logo was a balance that made my breath catch in my throat, $48,000. I stood there in the quiet of my hallway, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the background, and stared at the numbers. My eyes scanned the itemized list of recent charges. There were no emergency medical bills. There were no desperate grocery runs or payments to debt collectors. Instead, I saw a $2,000 charge at a luxury boutique in Aspen. I saw a tab for $800 at a Michelin-starred steakhouse downtown, dated just a week before they moved into my house. There were recurring charges for a high-end country club, a cosmetic dermatology clinic, and a boutique dog grooming service for that shivering little terrier Jessica carried around. They hadn't lost their house because a ruthless landlord sold it out from under them. They hadn't fallen on hard times because of a bad economy. They were drowning in debt because they refused to live within their means. They had spent their way into an eviction, and now they were using my home, the home I scrubbed floors and worked 60-hour weeks to afford, as a free hotel so they could continue their delusion of grandeur. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I carefully slid the statement back into the envelope, placed it on the console, and walked back out to my car. I didn't say a word about it that night. I needed to see what Liam knew. When Liam came to bed, I sat up, pulling the quilt around my shoulders. "Liam," I said quietly, "have Marcus and Jessica shown you any proof that they're looking for apartments? Any rental applications? Anything?" He rubbed his eyes, looking exhausted. "Chloe, please, not tonight. Marcus had a rough day. One of his investors backed out." "Did you know they owe nearly $50,000 on a single credit card?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. Liam froze. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall. "How do you know that?" "I saw a piece of mail that was torn open," I said. "Liam, they aren't victims of a bad landlord. They are bankrupting themselves on luxury dinners and designer clothes while living in my guest room for free. Did you know?" He finally turned to me, and the look of desperate pleading in his eyes made my stomach turn. "Chloe, you don't understand how Marcus operates. He has to maintain an image. In his line of work, if you don't look successful, people won't invest with you. It's a temporary cash flow problem." "An image?" I repeated, the absurdity of the word echoing in the quiet bedroom. "He is maintaining an image on my dime, in my house, and you are defending him." "He's my brother," Liam snapped, his voice rising in defensive anger. "You don't just abandon your family when they make financial mistakes. My mom would be devastated if she knew how judgmental you're being right now." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting Marcus and Jessica. I was fighting an entire family system designed to protect the worst behavior, all wrapped up in the sacred cow of family loyalty. Liam wasn't a partner protecting our future. He was a human shield for his brother's ego. I turned off my bedside lamp. "The 15th, Liam," I whispered into the dark. "If they aren't gone by the 15th, I am calling the police and having them removed for trespassing." I thought the credit card discovery would be the worst of it. I thought I had seen the absolute bottom of their entitlement. But the universe has a funny way of showing you just how deeply a foundation has rotted before the house finally collapses. 2 days later, I was scheduled to go out of town for a weekend design conference in Chicago. It was a crucial networking event, one I had been looking forward to for months. I packed my bags on Friday morning, gave Liam a stiff, mechanical hug goodbye, and ignored Jessica, who was lounging on the sofa watching morning talk shows. "Have a lovely trip, sweetie," she called out, not taking her eyes off the television. "Don't worry about a thing here. We'll hold down the fort." I spent 3 days in Chicago. For 3 days, I breathed clean air. I slept in a hotel room where my expensive lotions weren't scooped out by greedy fingers. I drank coffee out of ceramic mugs that no one had hidden from me. For 3 days, I remembered what peace felt like. I took an earlier flight home on Sunday afternoon. I didn't text Liam that I was coming back early. I just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and prepare myself for the final week before the 15th deadline. When I pulled my car into the driveway, I noticed 3 luxury SUVs parked along the curb. Music was thumping faintly through the walls of my house. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The smell of expensive perfume, baked brie, and spilled champagne hit me like a physical blow. I walked into my living room and stopped dead in my tracks. There were at least a dozen women in my house. They were sitting on my velvet sofa, leaning against my kitchen island and laughing loudly. Jessica was standing at the head of my dining table, pouring mimosas into my crystal champagne flutes, the ones I had bought specifically for my upcoming wedding toast. "Oh, and the natural light in the mornings is just divine," Jessica was saying, gesturing dramatically toward my large bay windows. "We're thinking of tearing down that wall to open up the kitchen, but Marcus says we should wait until the spring." One of the women, a blonde dripping in gold jewelry, nodded approvingly. "It has so much potential, Jess. You really saved this place. It's so much better than your old townhouse." My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just hosting a party in my home without my permission. She was claiming it. She was erasing me from my own life, rewriting the narrative to her wealthy friends so she wouldn't have to admit she was sleeping in her younger brother-in-law's fiancé's spare bedroom. I dropped my heavy leather travel bag onto the hardwood floor. The loud thud echoed through the room, cutting through the chatter and the music. 12 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. Jessica's face drained of color. For a fraction of a second, I saw absolute panic in her eyes. But then, the mask slid flawlessly back into place. She forced a bright, brittle smile. "Chloe," she practically sang, her voice pitched unnaturally high. "You're back early. Ladies, this is Chloe. She's Liam's little girlfriend. She's been staying with us while she figures out her living situation." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the lie actually left me speechless for a moment. I looked at the women who were giving me polite, slightly pitying smiles. Then I looked at Jessica. I didn't yell. Yelling is what crazy people do. Yelling gives them the power to call you hysterical. Instead, I walked slowly and deliberately across my living room, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. I walked right up to the dining table, picked up the bottle of expensive champagne she had bought with her maxed-out credit card, and poured the remainder of it straight down the sink drain. "Ladies," I sassy said, turning to face her guests. My voice was perfectly calm, lethal, and steady. "I am not Liam's little girlfriend. I am the sole owner of this property. Jessica and her husband were evicted from their rental due to massive credit card debt, and I allowed them to stay in my guest room so they wouldn't be homeless. But the charity ends today. I'm going to need you all to leave, now." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the rug. The blonde woman slowly set her crystal flute down on the table, her eyes darting nervously between me and Jessica. Without a word, the women began grabbing their designer purses and filing toward the front door. Jessica stood frozen, her face flushed a dark, furious mottled red. As the front door clicked shut behind the last guest, she turned on me, her features twisting into an ugly sneer. "You selfish, arrogant little bitch," she hissed, dropping the sweet, victimized act completely. "You humiliated me. You purposely humiliated me in front of my friends. You humiliated yourself the moment you started lying about owning my house," I replied, grabbing my bag. "You have exactly 5 days until the 15th. Start packing." I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked down the hallway, desperate for the quiet sanctuary of my design studio. I needed to sit at my grandmother's oak drafting table. I needed to touch the familiar wood, to ground myself in the space that was entirely, undeniably, mine. I reached the end of the hall and grabbed the brass doorknob to my studio. It didn't turn. I jiggled it. The handle was locked tight. Frowning, I reached into my purse and pulled out my heavy key ring. I slipped the brass key into the lock and tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. The key didn't fit. I leaned closer, inspecting the hardware. The lock was entirely different. The antique brass fixture I had sourced from an architectural salvage yard in Boston was gone, replaced by a cheap, shiny, generic silver deadbolt from a hardware store. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pounded my fist against the heavy wooden door. "Jessica!" I shouted, my composed facade finally cracking. "Jessica, what did you do to my door?" She sauntered down the hallway, her arms crossed, a look of smug, vindictive triumph on her face. "Oh, that. Well, since you're so particular about your precious space, Marcus and I decided we needed a designated area for our things. The guest room was getting too cramped. We had a locksmith come out yesterday. It's a playroom now. For the dog, mostly." "Where is my grandmother's desk?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it blurred my vision. "Where is my drafting table, Jessica?" She waved a hand dismissively. "That old piece of junk?" Marcus dragged it out to the garage. It was taking up way too much floor space, and honestly, it smelled like an antique store. We needed the room for the new Peloton bike Marcus ordered. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. I turned away from her, bolted down the hallway, through the kitchen, and threw open the door to the attached garage. The garage was unfinished, damp, and smelled of motor oil. And there, shoved into a corner next to a stack of moldy cardboard boxes, was my grandmother's drafting table. The table where she had taught me how to draw. The table I had painstakingly restored by hand. Marcus hadn't just moved it. He had dragged it. A massive, jagged gouge ran straight across the pristine oak surface, the wood splintered and ruined. One of the intricately carved legs was cracked entirely in half, the table leaning drunkenly against the concrete wall. I dropped to my knees on the cold garage floor and touched the ruined wood. A physical pain, sharp and agonizing, tore through my chest. They hadn't just taken my space. They had destroyed a piece of my history. They had punished me for asserting myself by breaking the thing they knew I loved the most. I sat in the garage for a long time. I didn't cry. Crying was for victims, and I was done being a victim. When I finally stood up, the last remnants of the girl who wanted to keep the peace were completely dead. I walked back into the house. Liam had just gotten home. He was standing in the kitchen, his tie loosened, looking frantically between the changed lock on my studio door and Jessica, who was sitting on the counter, pretending to file her nails. "Chloe," Liam breathed as I walked into the kitchen. He looked terrified. "Chloe, I just got home. I didn't know about the door. I swear to God I didn't know." "Get her out," I said, pointing a shaking finger at Jessica. "Get her out of my house right now, or I am calling the police and reporting a break-in and destruction of property." "You can't do that," Jessica snapped, hopping off the counter. "We have squatters' rights. We've been here over 30 days. You have to legally evict us, and that takes months. My lawyer friend told me all about it. You can't touch us." She was right. I knew she was right. The law, in all its bureaucratic cruelty, protected the parasites once they had attached themselves. I looked at Liam. "Did you hear her?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "She planned this. They never intended to leave. Now, Liam, I am asking you, as the man I am supposed to marry, what are you going to do about this?" Liam's face crumpled. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked at Jessica, then at the floor, and then slowly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please sit down. There's something else." I didn't sit. "Tell me." He pulled a sheet of paper from the envelope. It was a bank statement. A statement for our joint wedding savings account. The account I had been pouring half my paycheck into for the last year to pay for the caterer, the venue, and the florist. "Marcus was desperate," Liam choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "The credit card companies were threatening to sue him. My mom called me crying, begging me to help him. She said she'd disown me if I let my brother go to jail over a debt. She said we had all that money just sitting there for a party, and family is more important than a party." I snatched the paper from his hands. The balance, which should have been sitting at a comfortable $35,000, read $5,000. "You gave him $30,000, I stated. It wasn't a question. "It's a loan," Liam cried, reaching for my hands, but I recoiled as if he burned me. "He promised to pay it back with interest when his next venture takes off. Chloe, I had to. You don't know my mother. She would never forgive me. We can postpone the wedding. We can scale it down. Please, just try to understand." I looked at the man I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. I didn't see a partner. I saw a terrified little boy, so thoroughly manipulated by his toxic mother and his narcissistic brother that he was willing to steal from his future bride to fund their lies. He had taken the money I worked for, the money meant to celebrate our union, and handed it to the people who were actively destroying my sanctuary. "You stole from me," I whispered. "I protected my family," Liam shouted, the guilt finally morphing into defensive anger. "Money is just money, Chloe. Why are you always so obsessed with what belongs to who? We're supposed to be a team." I slowly folded the bank statement, perfectly in half, and then in quarters, pressing the creases sharply with my thumb. "You're right, Liam," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that made him physically step back. "Money is just money, and family is family. But this," I gestured to the walls around us, to the ruined door, to the empty spaces where my peace used to reside. "This is a war, and you just chose the wrong side." I turned my back on him and walked upstairs to my master bedroom. I locked the door behind me. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't cry. I walked over to my laptop, opened a new tab, and typed in the name of the most ruthless real estate attorney in the state of Ohio. They thought they had won. Jessica thought changing a lock and citing squatters' rights made her untouchable. Liam thought stealing my money would force me into submission. But they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I wasn't just a polite girl with a nice house. I was the architect of my own life. And if they wanted to play games with property and contracts, I was going to teach them a masterclass in total, absolute devastation. The Thanksgiving holiday was exactly 2.5 weeks away, and I was going to serve them a dinner they would never, ever forget. There is a specific kind of silence that descends on a house when the war has officially begun, but the first shot hasn't been fired yet. It's not a peaceful silence. It is the heavy, suffocating quiet of a breath being held. The morning after I found out Liam had handed $30,000 of our wedding fund to his brother, I didn't wake up screaming. I didn't pack a bag and storm out. I didn't even mention the money. I woke up, put on a pot of coffee, and went about my morning routine as if nothing had happened. When Liam came downstairs, his eyes darting nervously, searching my face for signs of an explosion, I simply handed him a mug. "Morning?" I said, my voice smooth and perfectly flat. He blinked, clearly entirely thrown off balance. "Chloe, about last night." "I don't want to talk about it right now, Liam," I interrupted softly, offering a tight, empty smile. "I need to get to work. We have a lot to do before Thanksgiving." And that was it. That was the beginning of my gray rock strategy. For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. I was unfailingly polite, completely emotionally detached, and gave them absolutely nothing to feed on. When Jessica made passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, I smiled and said, "I'll keep that in mind." When Marcus left his dirty boots on my expensive rugs, I quietly moved them to the mudroom without a word. To Liam, this sudden compliance was a massive relief. In his desperate conflict-avoidant mind, my silence meant I had accepted the situation. He thought I had gotten over it. He thought his mother's toxic logic had finally won me over. To Jessica, my silence was a surrender. She thought she had broken me. She began walking around the house with the confident swagger of a conqueror, completely unaware that she was actually walking through a minefield I was meticulously laying beneath her feet. 3 days after the fight, I took a half-day off work and drove downtown. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and walked into a high-end corporate law firm. I had spent hours researching the most aggressive, no-nonsense property attorneys in the city, and every search had pointed me to one specific man. I sat across from my attorney, an imposing, sharply dressed man named Robert, and slid a thick manila folder across his mahogany desk. "I have a squatter situation," I told him, keeping my posture straight and my voice steady. "They have been in my home for nearly 2 months. There is no lease. No rent has ever been paid. I am the sole owner on the deed, and I am not legally married to the man who invited them to stay." Robert opened the folder, reviewing the property records, my bank statements, and the photos I had taken of my ruined drafting table and the changed lock on my studio door. He was a man who clearly didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Standard protocol for unauthorized occupants in this state," Robert said, his deep voice carrying a tone of professional detachment, "requires a formal 30-day notice to quit, followed by an eviction filing if they refuse to leave. It can take months if they know how to play the system, and from the look of this changed lock, they intend to play the system." "I don't have months, Robert," I replied, leaning forward. "And I refuse to let them live in my home for another 30 days while they drag me through a court process. I need them out immediately, and I want it to be airtight." Robert leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a very expensive pen against his desk. He looked at me, really looked at me, and a slow, sharp smile spread across his face. "There is an alternative," he said smoothly. "It's aggressive, but entirely legal. We don't evict them as an individual homeowner. We transfer the deed of your property into a newly formed limited liability company, an LLC, of which you are the sole anonymous owner. Once the property is corporate-owned, the LLC can issue a zero-tolerance notice to vacate for trespass and destruction of corporate property. If they don't leave within the specified window, the LLC calls the sheriff, not Chloe, the exasperated fiancée." "Do it," I said without a second of hesitation. "Draft the paperwork. Form the LLC. I want the transfer complete before Thanksgiving." "It will cost you," he warned. "My fiancé just gave away $30,000 of my savings," I said coldly. "Consider this an investment in my sanity. Just make sure the notice is ready to be served when I give the signal." I left Robert's office feeling the first genuine spark of power I had felt in weeks. The trap was set. Now I just needed to let them walk right into it. When I got home that evening, the house smelled heavily of roasting meat and expensive wine. Jessica had taken it upon herself to start practicing for the massive Thanksgiving dinner she was planning. She had invited Liam's entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course Martha, the matriarch who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and that was when I noticed it. On the far side of the dining room, sitting on the antique buffet table, there was an empty space. A beautiful, heavy crystal vase that my mother had given me for my 21st birthday, a piece worth several $100s, was gone. I frowned, walking over to the buffet. I checked the cabinets underneath. Nothing. I checked the living room shelves. Nothing. "Looking for something, sweetie?" Jessica asked, leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass of Pinot Noir in her hand. My mother's crystal vase, I said, keeping my face perfectly blank. It was right here. Jessica didn't even blink. Oh, that old thing? One of the cats knocked it over yesterday. It shattered everywhere. I had to throw it out. I'm so sorry, Chloe, but honestly, it was a bit dated anyway. I'll pick you up something much more modern from Target next week. She was lying. I knew the moment the words left her mouth that she was lying. My cats were elderly and arthritic. They couldn't even jump onto the sofa, let alone a 4-foot-high buffet table. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Okay, thank you for cleaning it up. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and opened my laptop. A sick, sinking suspicion had taken root in my stomach. If she was willing to lie about a vase, what else had she done? I went to my jewelry box. My grandmother's pearl earrings were still there. I checked the closet. My designer bags were accounted for. Then I remembered the dining room. I crept back downstairs while Jessica and Marcus were loudly watching television in the living room and opened the bottom drawer of the china cabinet. My heart dropped into my shoes. The velvet-lined mahogany box that held a complete 60-piece set of vintage sterling silver flatware, an heirloom from my great-aunt, was completely empty. Every single piece of silver, worth thousands of dollars, was gone. I rushed back upstairs, my hands physically shaking. I opened Facebook and went straight to the local marketplace. I didn't search my own name. I created a dummy account, set my location to our zip code, and started searching for vintage silver flatware and crystal vase. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, I found a seller profile under the name Jess M. The profile picture was a generic photo of a sunset, but the location was listed as our exact suburb. I clicked on the listings. There, photographed beautifully on my own kitchen island, was my mother's crystal vase, listed for $150. Sold. Below it was the mahogany box of my great-aunt's silver flatware, listed for $800. Sold. I kept scrolling, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. She had been busy. There was a listing for a set of silk curtains I had stored in the guest room closet. There was a listing for an expensive blender I rarely used. She was systematically stealing my belongings, selling them for quick cash online, and using the money to fund her luxury grocery runs and designer dog grooming. She wasn't just a squatter. She was a thief. I took screenshots of every single listing. I documented the dates, the prices, and the photos, clearly showing my kitchen countertops in the background. I saved everything into a secure folder and emailed it directly to Robert, my attorney. Add theft and fencing stolen property to the corporate eviction notice, I typed. For the next 10 days, I lived a double life. By day, I was the accommodating, quiet, defeated fiancé. I helped Jessica pick out the perfect napkins for her Thanksgiving extravaganza. I smiled politely when Martha called and Liam put her on speakerphone so she could gush about how wonderful it was that the family was coming together in Marcus and Jessica's lovely new home. But by night, I was a ghost. I rented a small, climate-controlled storage unit 2 towns over. Every evening, while they were distracted by television or their endless bottles of wine, I would pack a single, heavy duffel bag. I packed my most important documents. I packed my jewelry. I packed the irreplaceable photos of my family, my favorite clothes, and my expensive electronics. I would wait until Liam fell asleep, carry the bag out to the trunk of my car in the dead of night, and drive it to the storage unit. Piece by piece, I was emptying myself out of that house, leaving behind only a hollow shell of the life I had built. I wanted to make sure that when the bomb finally detonated, none of my true valuables were in the blast radius. 2 days before Thanksgiving, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Liam was a nervous wreck, frantically cleaning the baseboards and stressing over the turkey order. Jessica was barking orders at him as if he were the hired help. I was in the hallway, carrying a basket of laundry to the basement, when I passed the closed door of the playroom, my former design studio. The door was slightly ajar and I could hear Marcus and Jessica arguing in hushed, urgent tones. I stopped. I held my breath, pressing my back against the wall, and listened. "The investor is breathing down my neck, Jess," Marcus was hissing, pacing back and forth across my ruined hardwood floors. "If I don't secure this capital by the end of the month, the whole deal goes under. They're going to come after my personal assets." "What assets, Marcus?" Jessica snapped back, her voice dripping with venom. "We have nothing. My credit cards are maxed. We sold the cars, and I'm practically hawking her plates online just to keep up appearances. You told me Liam was going to handle this. He gave us the 30 grand, but it wasn't enough to cover the margin call, Marcus growled. I need a guarantor for a $100,000 business loan. The bank won't look at me with my credit score. There was a pause. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass. Then we do it on Thursday, Jessica said, her voice dropping into a chilling, calculated register. Thanksgiving dinner. Your mother will be here. Liam can never say no to Martha. We get him a few drinks in. We get Martha to start crying about family unity and how hard we've had it. And we slide the guarantor paperwork in front of him. Jess, 100 grand? Liam doesn't make that kind of money. He doesn't have to, Jessica sneered. He's marrying the girl who owns this house. They're basically married already. The bank just needs collateral, Marcus. Liam signs the guarantee, and if you default, they just put a lien on this property. Chloe doesn't even have to know until it's too late. It's the perfect collateral. A wave of pure, unadulterated nausea washed over me. So strong I had to grip the laundry basket to keep from falling over. They weren't just stealing my peace, or my silver, or my wedding fund. They were plotting to steal the very roof over my head. They were going to use Liam's pathetic, spineless loyalty to his family to trick him into putting a massive lien on the house I had broken my back to buy. And they were going to do it in my dining room while eating the food I paid for. I walked silently away from the door, carrying the laundry down to the basement. I didn't cry. The time for crying was long gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Robert, my attorney. LLC transfer is complete. The deed is officially out of your name and secured under the corporation. The eviction notice has been drafted, signed by the magistrate, and is legally binding. The trap is armed. I stared at the screen in the dim light of the basement. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I walked over to a stack of old boxes in the corner of the basement and pulled out a heavy black case. Inside was a high-definition Bluetooth-enabled projector I used for client presentations. I checked the battery. It was fully charged. They wanted a family Thanksgiving. They wanted a captive audience to execute their grand manipulation. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp, bright, and utterly devoid of mercy. I woke up at 6 o'clock, not to the smell of roasting turkey, but to the sound of Jessica barking orders at Liam in my kitchen. I lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling an unnatural, profound calm wash over me. Today was the day. I had spent the last 2 weeks meticulously packing my life into a storage unit, securing my finances, and legally erasing my name from the property deed. The house I was lying in no longer belonged to Chloe, the accommodating fiancé. It belonged to a faceless, ruthless corporate entity. And corporations do not care about family loyalty. I took a long, hot shower, using the last of my expensive shampoo that Jessica hadn't managed to steal. I dressed carefully, not in sweatpants or an apron, but in a sharply tailored charcoal blazer, a black silk blouse, and fitted trousers. It was armor. When I walked downstairs, the house was a chaotic blur of pretension. Jessica had hired a private chef to cook the turkey, paid for, no doubt, by the sale of my great-aunt's silver. Marcus was in the living room, pouring expensive scotch into my crystal tumblers, loudly discussing the stock market with his uncle, who had arrived early. And then there was Martha. Liam's mother was a formidable woman who wore her passive aggression like expensive perfume. The moment she saw me, her eyes did a slow, calculating sweep from my hair to my shoes. "Chloe, dear," she said, offering a cheek that smelled of powder and gin. "You're certainly dressed up. Jessica has been working her fingers to the bone preparing this gorgeous home for us, and you look like you're going to a board meeting. You really should put on an apron and help your future sister-in-law." "Good morning, Martha," I replied, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. Jessica seems to have everything exactly the way she wants it. I wouldn't dream of interfering. Liam shot me a nervous, pleading look from across the kitchen. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes dark and heavy. He was drowning under the weight of his brother's demands and his mother's expectations, and he still thought his $30,000 betrayal was safely hidden under the rug. I didn't look back at him. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and retreated to the periphery, a silent observer in my own home. By 3 o'clock, the house was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends crowded into the living room. Jessica floated among them, a glass of champagne in hand, graciously accepting compliments on her beautiful house, her stunning bay windows, and her exquisite taste in decor. I watched her point out the architectural details I had spent months researching and restoring, claiming every ounce of my hard work as her own. At 4 o'clock, dinner was served. My dining room table had been extended to its maximum length. Because it was my house, and because I knew exactly what was about to happen, I didn't fight Jessica for the seat at the head of the table. I let her sit there, beaming like a queen presiding over her court. Marcus sat to her right, puffing his chest out. Liam and I were seated near the middle, directly across from Martha. For the first 45 minutes, the dinner was a masterclass in superficiality. Glasses clinked, the private chef's food was passed around, and Marcus held court, talking loudly about his imminent expansion into commercial real estate. Then the dessert plates were cleared, and the temperature in the room subtly shifted. I saw Jessica catch Marcus's eye. She gave him a microscopic nod. It was time. Marcus cleared his throat, tapping his spoon against his crystal water glass. The chatter around the table slowly died down. "If I could just have everyone's attention for a moment," Marcus began, standing up and placing a heavy hand on Liam's shoulder. "Thanksgiving is about family, and this year, Jess and I have realized just how deeply blessed we are to have a family that steps up when the chips are down. We've had a minor setback, as you all know, but we are on the precipice of something massive." Martha dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. "We are so proud of you, Marcus. You're so resilient." "We couldn't have done it without Liam," Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached under her chair and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. "In fact, Liam, Marcus's new investors just need one final piece of paperwork to release the capital. It's just a formality, really, a guarantor signature." She slid the folder down the table. It stopped directly in front of Liam. Liam stared at it, the color draining completely from his face. "Marcus," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What is this? I already gave you everything I had. I gave you $30,000. A collective gasp rippled through the extended family. Martha's head snapped up. Even Marcus looked momentarily panicked that Liam had blurted out the amount in public. "Liam, keep your voice down," Marcus hissed, his jovial mask slipping. "That was a temporary loan. This is just a signature to secure the business line of credit. It's $100,000. The bank just needs collateral." "I don't have collateral," Liam choked out, his hands shaking. "I don't own anything worth $100,000. "You're about to," Jessica said smoothly, her eyes darting toward me. "You and Chloe are getting married in a few months. This house is a marital asset. The bank will accept the property as collateral with your signature as a cohabitant and future spouse. It's entirely standard, Liam. Chloe won't mind. Family helps family, right, Chloe?" The entire table turned to look at me. Martha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "It's just a signature, Chloe. You're marrying into this family. You should be honored to help Marcus get back on his feet." They had cornered him. They had waited until he was surrounded by his entire family, paralyzed by his mother's expectations, to force him to sign away my house. Liam looked at me, tears brimming in his eyes. His hand was actually trembling as he reached toward the pen sitting on top of the folder. He was going to do it. To appease his mother, to avoid a scene, he was going to try and mortgage my life. "Put the pen down, Liam," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the dining room like a crack of a whip. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I didn't look at Liam. I didn't look at Martha. I looked dead at Jessica, who was staring back at me with a smirk of absolute untouchable arrogance. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a small black remote. I pointed it at the high-definition projector I had hidden on top of the china cabinet earlier that afternoon, aimed directly at the blank, cream-colored wall behind Jessica's head. I pressed the button. With a soft hum, the wall lit up. The projector screen was 10 feet wide, impossible to ignore. "Since we are talking about transparency and family investments," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room, "I think everyone here should understand exactly what kind of business Marcus and Jessica are running." I clicked the next button on the remote. The first slide appeared. It was a blown-up, crystal-clear image of Jessica's credit card statement. The massive, bold red letters at the top screamed, "Outstanding balance, $48,450. Below it, the itemized list of luxury vacations, Michelin-starred dinners, and designer shopping sprees was legible to everyone in the room. "Marcus didn't have a minor setback," I stated, pacing slowly down the length of the table. They were evicted because they blew $500,000 on luxury clothes and country club memberships while refusing to pay their rent. "Turn that off!" Marcus roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He lunged toward the projector, but he couldn't reach it on top of the tall cabinet. I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted. Now it displayed the screenshots from Jessica's secret Facebook Marketplace account. There were side-by-side photos, the crystal vase sitting on my kitchen counter, and the receipt showing it sold for $150. Next to it was the 60-piece sterling silver flatware set, sold for $800. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the aunts and uncles. Martha let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jessica hasn't just been living here rent-free," I continued, my tone conversational, as if I were presenting a quarterly earnings report. "She has been systematically stealing my family heirlooms and pawning them online to pay for her dog groomer. That is called fencing stolen property. It is a felony." "She's lying!" Jessica shrieked, jumping out of her chair, her mask completely shattered. "Those are doctored. She's a psychotic, jealous bitch who's trying to ruin us." "I don't need to lie, Jessica," I said coldly. "You're doing a fantastic job of ruining yourself." I clicked the remote one last time. An audio file began to play through the projector's surround sound speakers. It was the recording I had taken from the hallway. The sound quality was perfect. "The bank just needs collateral, Marcus. Liam signs the guarantee, and if you default, they just put a lien on this property. Chloe doesn't even have to know until it's too late. It's the perfect collateral." Jessica's own voice, cold and calculated, filled the dining room. The silence that followed the recording was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total destruction. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Martha turned slowly, her face pale and horrified, to look at her eldest son. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling with devastation, "you were going to steal your brother's home? You were going to let him take on $100,000 of debt so you could keep playing pretend?" For the first time in his life, Marcus had absolutely nothing to say. I walked over to Liam. He was staring at the wall, his face buried in his hands, quietly sobbing. He had traded my safety, my peace, and my money to protect a mirage. I slid the heavy diamond engagement ring off my left ring finger. I held it between my thumb and forefinger for a second, feeling the cold weight of the metal. Then I dropped it directly into Liam's half-full glass of red wine. It sank to the bottom with a quiet final plink. "You gave them $30,000 of my savings to protect this family, Liam," I said softly, so only he could hear. "Consider that ring the price of admission to this circus. I'm done." Jessica, cornered and frantic, suddenly lashed out. She slammed her hands onto the table, rattling the plates. "You think you're so smart?" she screamed, her face contorted with pure, unhinged rage. "You think you can just embarrass us and throw us out? We have rights. We've been here for 60 days. You can't legally kick us out without a formal eviction process, and that takes months. We're not leaving. I will live in this house, and I will drag this out until you are begging us to leave." I looked at her. I didn't frown. I didn't scowl. I gave her the slowest, coldest, most terrifying smile I have ever smiled in my entire life. I reached inside my blazer and pulled out a thick, legal envelope bearing the seal of the county magistrate. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right on top of her fraudulent loan documents. "You're absolutely right, Jessica," I said, my voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "I can't evict you, because as of 48 hours ago, I do not own this house." Jessica blinked, her rage faltering into confusion. "What?" "I transferred the deed," I explained, relishing every single syllable. "This property is now wholly owned by a corporate entity, a limited liability company, and under state law, corporate-owned properties do not have to endure a standard residential eviction process for unauthorized occupants. What you are looking at is a legally binding, zero-tolerance notice to vacate for corporate trespass, signed by a judge." I leaned forward, placing both of my hands flat on the table, looking directly into her panicked eyes. "You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to vacate the premises. If you, Marcus, or your dog are still on this property at 8:01 a.m., the county sheriff's department will arrive. They will arrest you for trespassing, and they will physically drag you out to the curb. And I promise you, Jessica, I will be standing right on the lawn to watch it happen." I stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of my blazer. I didn't look back at the table. I walked to the front closet, pulled out my coat, and picked up the single leather duffel bag I had packed with my remaining essentials. Behind me, the dining room exploded. Martha was wailing, a high-pitched sound of total despair. Marcus was shouting at Liam, blaming him for not controlling me. Jessica was screaming at everyone. It was the sound of a toxic foundation finally collapsing in on itself. I opened my front door and stepped out into the crisp, cold November evening. The air smelled like pine needles and wood smoke. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, clean oxygen. I walked to my car, put my bag in the trunk, and drove away from the house I had built. I spent that night in a beautiful suite at a downtown hotel. I ordered room service, drank a glass of incredibly expensive champagne, and slept for 12 hours straight without waking up once. The next morning, at exactly 8:15 a.m., my attorney sent me a text message. It was a photo taken by the private security contractor he had hired to oversee the vacate order. It showed Marcus and Jessica, looking disheveled and frantic, shoving garbage bags full of clothes into the back of an Uber, while a county sheriff's cruiser sat idling in my driveway. Liam tried to call me 57 times over the next week. He left voicemails begging for forgiveness, swearing he would get the money back, promising he would cut his family off forever. I deleted every single one of them. I had Robert handle the legal dissolution of our joint accounts. I never spoke to him again. It took 2 months to clean the house, repair the damages, and move my belongings out of storage. When I finally spent my first night back in my own bed, the house was entirely silent. There were no footsteps in the hall. There was no smell of cheap cologne or stolen lotion. The air was mine. The space was mine. If you are reading this, and you are shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's demands, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your home is not a hotel for the irresponsible. Your peace is not a currency to be spent on keeping toxic people comfortable. When someone shows you that they do not respect your boundaries, do not negotiate. Do not wait for them to see the light. You build a fortress, you lock the doors, and you protect your sanctuary with everything you have. Generosity is a beautiful thing, but survival requires a spine of steel. And sometimes the most empowering thing a woman can do is look at the people trying to tear her down, hand them the match, and watch them burn themselves to the ground.